So we are recording this primarily for Angela Chin, who's the student who's in the block pose right now, or Angela.
Yeah.
But a couple other students needed to miss today, so we'll have an audio and video file in case anybody needs to listen again. So hello everyone. I hope your bug bites have healed. I have acid bite in my bag still if you need it. So we are talking first today about writing a scientific abstract. You may or may not have done this before for a class, but we have a colleague of mine who is really good at, hi Chris, at just talking you through the important elements of an abstract. And I just want to note for you that July 17th is the deadline for submitting your abstract to the graduate school so that it can go in the booklet. I actually wrote July 17th on my hand, so I would remind you about that. So that's only in a few weeks now, so that's a date to pay attention to. So we're going to be talking about this for about 30 minutes, and then some of your grad student mentors will be coming in as we're talking, and they're going to show us some examples of posters that they've made in the past, and you'll get to ask a lot of questions about why they made the decisions they made and what they would do better or what they like about their poster or whatever. Okay, so I'll turn it over to you so you can get us going.
All right, good to see everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Rybarczyk. I'm with the graduate school. I think some of you may have attended our writing personal statement workshop a couple weeks ago. Yes, no.
I think that was the week we were on our retreat.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's why you couldn't make it. Okay, that's why you're like.
They have no personal statements.
Okay. So today we're going to be thinking about your current research project. That's going to set the stage, obviously, for your abstract, and then also setting it up for the poster. How many of you have presented a poster before, a research poster? Only a couple of you, good. As well as writing an abstract. So this is maybe new in terms of scientific communication, or hopefully you'll, if you've done this before, learn some additional skills and techniques. So anytime you're writing, it's going to take some time and practice, and it's going to take some revision, revision, and revision. So whatever comes out first, that's okay. The point today is I want you to be thinking about and generating some text. So hopefully you brought some paper and to start generating some text for your abstract. Okay, so that's my goal for today. Before we dive into this, what kinds of concerns or questions do you have that we need to address about an abstract? Questions or concerns about writing an abstract, or maybe the content of an abstract. We've read abstracts before, but now it's your turn to actually create one. What are some of your apprehensions, questions?
How long do they generally?
Okay, how long? Quick answer, it can vary. And so if you're submitting for a conference, symposium, they'll generally give you guidelines for that. Sometimes it's by character, so character limit with or without spaces. Sometimes it's 250 to 300 words, sometimes it's 500 words. So somewhere along those lines. I would recommend about 250 to 300 words. That's the general rule.
Mine is how much jargon is appropriate in
Good.
an abstract.
So do you know what jargon is? Kind of abbreviations or specific terminology for your discipline. Again, it's a balance because you're writing it for other scientists. But you want to be accurate, but you don't want to kind of lose the reader in a bunch of abbreviations and words because then they're not going to follow it. So again, that's one of the skills that you're going to practice over time as a scientist. Other concerns or questions?
Is there a certain criteria that we need to hit on in our abstract? Like, are there certain points that we need to address?
Perfect. Excellent. Yes. This is not an exercise in creative writing. It's pretty formulaic. And so there are certain things that other scientists are going to be looking for anyways. And so don't hide it. Don't be too creative. And we'll work through that formula together today. Okay. So, Megan, did you have a chance to send out that template?
Nope.
Okay. So there is a template that Megan has that she'll send around to you, and we'll work through some of those different prompts today. But essentially, that's what is going to be the structure of your abstract. And it's nice because you can go in and fill in those different blanks, but also see where there are gaps. What else do you need to fill in? Some of that you can't fill in today because you're not done with your research project yet, but towards the end, you should be able to. So that's kind of where we're headed on for today. So we're going to talk about the purpose and some guidelines, the components, and actually start writing, generating some text about your research project. So in terms of detail, this is kind of a spectrum of the level of detail that's kind of expected in your abstract, all right? So I have another version of this too, where so a journal article that you're reading is going to have a lot of detail, right? And so that detail is important, especially maybe in the materials and methods sections, for someone else to actually replicate those terms. Okay? That's not appropriate for your abstract. Okay? Maybe in your poster or your talk, you'll have some of those details in, but the abstract is going to be a much more of a summary. Kind of the main points, the critical pieces that you need to communicate about your project to your audience. Okay? So your audience is other researchers. They may or may not be doing the same kind of research that you're doing. They may or may not be familiar with the terminology. So that's kind of your perspective when you're actually writing it. Is someone else going to actually understand? So always keep that in mind. Again, this is a skill you're going to develop as a scientist. The more you do it, the more you practice. Okay? So here are some of the basic points. So it must contain a statement of your problem or question under investigation. Ideally, it should contain a hypothesis. Now, some of your research projects may not necessarily be what we call hypothesis-driven. It may be more descriptive. It may be more a little bigger in terms of maybe an initial investigation. And so that's a little flexible, but it should state some reason why you're doing this particular research. Right? We'll add to this in a minute. It should also contain some experimental methods. And we'll practice this because you can actually save some space by combining some of the methods with the actual results. Okay. So those results, even if they're preliminary, should be stated. Right? So that's what's expected in an abstract. If you state results will be discussed, that's not appropriate. Okay? Especially if you're submitting for a conference, they'll probably reject it outright because you don't have any results written in there. And then it should have some kind of conclusion. So this is a basic set of things that need to be included in your abstract. And if you expand this, that will then also become your poster. Okay? Again, we're going to add some additional pieces to this. Okay, so does that answer your question in terms of expectation?
Sorry, this might be dumb. Could we get rejected from the undergraduate research symposium?
No. Probably not.
Okay.
So especially for local kinds of things, they want you to be able to present. For some of the other national types of conferences, they'll have certain standards that they're looking for. Okay. But if you start using some of these standard conventions anyways,
yeah. Okay.
It's going to be a better abstract and you won't hopefully be rejected outright. Okay, so that's what we're trying to avoid. You want to have a good solid type of abstract to be able to present. Yeah, at the undergraduate level, it's a little different. Once you become a little more invested as a graduate student, there's more opportunity that you might not be accepted into.
Gotcha.
Good question. Regardless, you want to put your best foot forward.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So some unnecessary things, you don't have to include references. Okay, that's a little different than a poster, than a journal article. Okay, so don't worry about those particular references. Statistical procedures or software, unless that's the focus of your project, you don't have to include that level of detail. If you're presenting some statistical data, just naming the type of test that you use and the actual significance level, that's kind of the level of detail to be expected in an abstract, nor specific details about methodology. So we're not talking about a protocol, so it's not repeating a protocol here, but it's giving a summary. So you use technique X to be able to determine Y. Okay, so that gives me enough information how you did it, and then what the results were. And so that's kind of the level that we're pitching it at. So here are some sample titles. So your first writing task, hopefully you can pull out some paper and a pen or a laptop, is to think about some options for a title. So this could be maybe a major conclusion, which maybe at this point you don't necessarily have. You're about halfway through your project. So maybe something more along the description line might be helpful. You want to think about the different components about your project that you might formulate into a nice, concise statement. So that's the purpose of the title. So I'll give you each a few minutes or so to generate some potential titles, maybe 2 or 3 different options. All right, and these are some samples, maybe a little more mechanistic. Maybe you're testing, for example, the first one, carbon dioxide, and how that might influence certain mechanisms in this particular system that you're studying. So that's kind of mechanistic sample title number 1. Maybe a method approach. Maybe you're implementing a specific method for the first time in a particular context. Or it might just be a little bit more descriptive. So what I'd like for you to do is just take a stab and maybe come up with a formulation of maybe 2 different variations of the title for your particular project. Right? And so if you were maybe explaining your project to me, tell me your project in a sentence. And I'm not going to correct your spelling, grammar, or anything like that. This is just to get some ideas down on paper. Think about the different components you're looking at in your project, maybe a specific context, maybe a specific type of methodology that you're using that might be appropriate to include in the title. Again, this may change in a couple of weeks as you launch this project or ready to finalize an abstract. This is a good start. Sometimes people wait till the end of their project to actually come up with a title, because sometimes maybe it can also be effective to use maybe the main conclusion that you come to as your title. Right? And so sometimes that's another strategy, but since we're here today, halfway through, let's think about just thinking about your project. Who wants to share?
Can't be that long.
No, so don't worry about length. So again, one of the things about writing is it's okay to write a little longer and then get some feedback. Do I need to pare this down? Do I really need all these words? Can I say it a little slightly different? And you want it to be accurate and descriptive, but you don't want it to be as long as your abstract, because that's not the point. Who would like to share? What's your name?
Sophia.
Sophia.
I guess, okay.
Just one of those variations.
So my first one is the oil refinery impact on perceived health and environment in Esperanza.
Great. So I know what it is, and the context of what you're doing, and maybe even specifically where you're doing it. So that gives me, as someone passing by your poster, an indication, am I going to be interested in stopping and talking with you about your particular research study? Somebody else.
Examination of American glycerides to determine short-term climate variability along the coastal frontiers of bias.
Great. So a little more specific about determining something about this particular context. Excellent. Good. Another example?
Sure. Developing an approach to measure policy impactfulness of academic research on species of tuna and marine turtle.
Excellent. So you're determining a particular approach. That's kind of the focus of your research project within this context. Good. See how this works? You can do this. So again, I would continue coming up with different variations of your title that may change over time. Certainly run this by your mentors to see if this kind of fits.
If I'm working on a specific type of model system, should I include their scientific name in my title?
You can. So what would your variation be?
Quantifying conservation rates in livestock administration of bioluminescent bacteria, Vibrio fischeri, and Hawaiian bucktail squid.
Great. So it's specific about what you're doing within this particular species. Again, that gives me a couple different hooks. If I'm interested in that particular methodology, or if I'm interested in this particular population of squid, is that right?
Well, bacteria in the squid.
Okay, so there's some interaction there. So that's an additional hook. Maybe I'm more interested in bacteria versus the squid. And so it's descriptive, it's accurate, and it gives some hooks for the audience. Good. Confident? Okay. So those are titles. Again, that can change over time, but I think you have a good start with that. So background for the abstract. Again, thinking about, let me fast forward here. Do I have that? Oh, I don't have it in this one, sorry. Let's go back to, this isn't very cooperative. Let me go back to my beginning slide because I have an hourglass on here. So I want you to think about the structure for your abstract. Start big in general. Okay, give me a context, give me some background, set the stage essentially. All right. Then you're going to narrow down and focus to your particular research question, your hypothesis. Then when you have data, you're going to be writing about your data. And then at the end, bring it back like that hourglass to connect it to the big picture. Why is this important? Does it change something about your particular research area? Is it a new finding? Is it confirmatory of something else, maybe in a different context? So think about that hourglass structure as kind of a formulation structure for your abstract. Does that make sense in terms of that? So let's think about that as we think about background. Okay? Yes.
Can we use any personal pronouns in our abstract or the poster?
Generally, the only personal pronoun would be we, and I would use that slightly sparingly. Sometimes it's hard not to, but I would not use I. Okay, that is not conventional. So sometimes you'll see we hypothesize something, but generally it's just kind of the facts leaving out kind of the personal pronouns. Okay, so it's a slightly different way to write, but again, you'll get used to writing this way. So you have your title. Now is your opportunity to give a little bit more background. Okay, so setting the stage. What is kind of the big picture? Say it in a sentence. The other approach is previous studies. Maybe write one or two sentences. Maybe previous studies from your lab found X, and that led us to my current research question. So how is it related? How is previous studies maybe similar or different? And then how does it lead to your particular project? So go ahead and take, again, a few more minutes to write down some ideas for what you would include in the background. Okay? Keep it succinct, no more than 3 or 4 sentences. Because one of my pet peeves of reading an abstract is half of it as background, and then maybe there's one statement about your research, and I'm like, oh, that's not very significant.
So is the section on the previous studies, right, 1 to 2 sentences, is that included in a 3 to 4 sentences or a separate?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is hard to make it concise, but this is part of the practice of an abstract.
So like setting the stage, like kind of like a sentence summarizing maybe like your research or just.
It's usually within the field. So, for example, cancer treatment has been an ongoing challenge in the past 20 years. Previous studies from our lab have shown X. My current study is focused on Y. So it's very packaged. So it really is getting from that big picture down pretty quickly.
When you say sentences, like how big is a sentence? Because I mean, I can imagine you could do like one long run-on sentence, which is technically considered one.
True,
So,
which isn't always very readable, but go ahead and just write it out. So right now we're just generating text. Again, you can always go back and revise, make it a little more concise, get your ideas out. Big picture, previous studies, your study. Give me a context. Maybe a context of the problem, the big problem in your field, or the challenge. Statement about a previous study, which will then set up the rationale for your study. Generating text. Keep writing, keep writing. So this is really the setting up the rationale, the reason why you're taking on this particular project or this particular research question. So it's really a justification for that. Does that make sense? We all have some text. Good. Some text. Yeah. That's what we're doing. Yes.
So Will there be a separate section for background on
This
the
is it.
poster? Or this is it? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, on the poster?
Mhm.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So that's going to be an expanded view of what you just did.
Okay.
Okay. So really, you're condensing this background section down into maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 sentences. Okay. But yeah, your background introduction section of your poster is going to be a little more elaborated. Okay. And that's where you might be referencing some previous studies, a little more in detail, a little more wordage with that, maybe even a diagram might be helpful. And so hopefully some of the graduate students will share that with you, because your poster is really your visual aid to help explain your research project. And so if there are certain processes or other diagrams that will help the audience member visualize what you're doing or why you're doing it, or some previous studies, that will be more beneficial. That's helpful in terms of the background introduction. Good? Okay, so hopefully that at this point you can do pretty well. Okay. The next step then will be kind of a statement of your research question, maybe a hypothesis. So can you do that? Can you formulate a statement? You have until 42.
Yes.
Okay. So formulate a statement about your research question or focus or objective. So we set out to, the focus of this research project is, so our research question we are investigating is, so complete that sentence, make it a sentence. So focus on the research, focus, the problem, the objective in a sentence. So when I read your abstract, I shouldn't have to work too hard to find that question or that research focus, because you're going to state it as is. Okay, you have a research statement, a focus, objective. So data. Let's talk about data and methods. So on your poster, you'll likely have a separate section on methodology and then results. Okay. In an abstract, you can actually condense this a little bit. And I have 2 examples up here. Don't worry about whether or not you understand it. This is just illustrating how you might combine a methodology with an actual result in a sentence. Okay. So do you all have, well, let's look at the examples and then we'll get to your own writing. So one is, so this first one, so we use microarrays to determine the genome-wide expression levels of 5 different reaction mechanisms. The results showed what? Okay. So this, I can tell that the technique I use is microarrays. So whoever you're presenting to will hopefully understand what that is. Use it to determine something, right? We're looking for something, and then get into the results. So I'm combining a method with the actual kind of rationale and results, right? Similarly, in the bottom panel, or in the bottom example, so comparing enzymatic activity between control and experimental groups indicated higher level after treatment with drug X. So again, we're combining you know that I measured enzymatic activity. You know my two different groups, control and experimental. You might want to name them. So experimental group of untreated mice with the treated mice, be more specific with how many, and then get into the actual results. So can you think of right now, do you each have maybe a piece of data yet? How many have some data? Maybe? Okay. Can you maybe at least describe some of the methods that you're using? That's going to be helpful for this and or your poster. So maybe generate a statement about a method that you're using and why you're actually using it. What are you actually measuring or trying to determine from using that particular method? So try that, a method statement.
Like you don't want to, like you're not supposed to write out the software.
So it depends. So right now, go ahead and use it, plug it in. So we use this particular software to do what?
We're running out of rules.
Maybe up there. So this is going to demonstrate to your audience that what kind of technique you're using and that you know that it's an appropriate technique for what you're trying to get out of it or measure. Yes.
If you're using multiple techniques, we should list all of them.
I wouldn't list them.
Or not list, but like describe.
It's going to be a little different on your poster. You might have blocks of text for each of your individual types of techniques that you use, and maybe some level of detail for kind of the types of data that you analyze. But I would match each of the different methodologies with an actual result, so that it would look slightly different in an abstract. So give me an example.
Should I just read what I have?
Yeah.
Okay. So sequential extraction method modified from Chain Jackson 1957 will be used to isolate phosphorus associated with the elements aluminum, iron, and calcium that are present in each location. A colorimetric method will also be used to measure the concentrations of each species of phosphorus. We will also measure the soil pH and use X-ray diffraction to look at the soil mineralogy and impact of clays on phosphorus retention. Okay, so I would break those up. Once you actually have results, we use this particular technique to determine what. So that would be one sentence in your abstract. Then in the next sentence, it would be the second technique. And so you don't want to use will be determined because you've already collected data. At this present time, that's appropriate. So what was the second technique? Colorimetric method.
So we use colorimetric method to determine X, and we found Y.
So you just list the data, list the results after stating the method.
Right. So that's the way to condense in an abstract. Okay. So as a scientist, I know you use this particular technique and got out this particular set of data. Okay. Is that helpful? And then again, as you progress through your project before July 17th, when you actually have to turn in your abstract, that's what it's going to look like. Okay, so as you have more data. Does that make sense? And then the conclusion and the context. So what are the main takeaway points from your research? All right, so this is kind of a quick summary of the salient points of your research. And also, why are these important? So again, thinking back to that big picture, how does it connect with that big picture? And why is this important? Why does this add something new? Does it confirm previous results? Maybe it contradicts previous results. Maybe it's some possible application to other systems or other contexts. And then you might also want to indicate future studies. So from this research, we anticipate doing X, Y, and Z, or we can see how it's applied to this other system, or it informs a different process, or it has impact here. Without that, it kind of just is a cliffhanger. It just ends with your research, and then you're left with the so what question. So you don't want to leave your reader hanging. Okay? You want to kind of wrap it up at the end to give a nice, concise summary, a thoughtful way that you thought about your conclusions and applied it to something bigger. Okay? So at this point, you probably don't have conclusions, but that's okay. Okay? So some of the kind of straightforward or common phrases that you might find in some abstracts. And here's a short list. So previous studies have shown what? Our results show, we hypothesize that. So you're automatically telling your reader all of these different components that they're expecting to see anyways in your abstract. So there's no question. I don't have to work too hard to figure it out. So just be clear about it. Taken together in summary. In contrast to previous studies, so this is indicating something new and different that you discovered from previous studies or prior studies. Novel findings, so this is something new. So that's a great indicator for your reader. Wow, this is something new that I found in this particular course. So that draws some excitement, some hooks. This is important because the key results are. Okay? So this is a quick condensed version of your whole research project. Okay? So these are some, again, some key phrases that will indicate to your reader some of these main points. So again, these are some tools. You got a good start about formulating some text, and everyone generated text, right? You accomplished your goal. And now, continuing on, further doing your experiments, analyzing data, drawing conclusions. So you still have some work to do, but you have a really good start now with your abstract. Does that make sense? Good.
Yeah, so I hope to get a Sakai site up for us tomorrow, and if I do, I'll post these and the other tool. If
Right.
I don't, I will just email it so people have access to it.
So what Megan is talking about, I kind of have an open template here of some of the prompts. Again, similar to what we worked through today for the research question, hypothesis. So this is a way that you can start filling this in. And then when you want to kind of finalize your abstract, you would just kind of remove these specific prompts, and that then becomes your abstract in this particular sequence. All right. And then it also shows you some gaps. Maybe you're not sure about how to address this particular, maybe alternative explanations that you might have to incorporate. Or what is the main conclusion of the content? Okay, so it's going to show you what you already know, what you can fill in, and also some gaps that you need to go back to and address. Any other questions about abstracts? Or any words of advice from current grad students about writing an abstract?
Well, let's, so if your grad mentor is here, I will let you introduce them to the group and tell us something interesting about them. How's that? Okay, who wants to start?
I'm Nadia. I work in the fluid lab with Pierre, the postdoc over there, and he's from France.
That's interesting.
I don't know, I thought so.
Cool. Yes, you want to introduce your
you mean that.
Oh, I think
Or, okay, yeah, so
this is Matt and Will.
I'm here. So as you know, I work in the fluid lab. It's a big facility. Nadia is part of the team now, and she's actually taking after Matthew, who's here today with us. He used to work in the lab as well. And today we also have William, who is a high school student who is coming over the summer for 2 weeks and discovered what the lab is about. It's a very big facility. It's really hard to run. Difficult, a lot of fights, a lot of stuff. But Nadia is actually picking up on everything in the lab, which is very interesting. and she's been working really hard, although like very few results popped out, but we've had some very nice hints, and we're sure to go in the right direction, which is a very good thing. So, yeah, that's it.
Okay. Well, who wants to
Yeah, so I'm Christina. My mentor is Stephanie, and one cool thing about her, she's really good at fishing and like catching things. She always talks about fishing, and like we went on a shark survey, and she like got to put a shark, and she was really happy about that. So.
All right. Next.
My name is Savannah, and my grad student mentor is Kaylin. We also work in the fluids lab, and I'm having a hard time picking one interesting thing.
I'm gonna make this look bad.
Kaylin was smoking bacon yesterday for 4 hours. So
Cool.
Yeah, it is smoker. I wasn't
In the lab?
It's an outdoor smoker. Feels like protein. So we steamed, bakery with chips and 2 kinds of homemade bacons.
That's so interesting.
Half of the fluids lab downstairs is just
It's a smoke room.
cooking equipment.
I imagine you'll have a lot of good sous vide equipment.
Oh yeah,
Having
yeah.
all the food.
All right, Natalie.
Yes, my name is Natalie, and my grad mentor is Madeline. And cool, interesting fact. No, there's tons, right? She's doing, first, she loves soils, which is awesome. Second, she's doing some cool work in the Galapagos, which is also awesome because, I mean, the Galapagos. So, yes.
All right, well, those of you who did not introduce yourselves, can you just say your name and who you're working with so everybody can place everybody? Chris?
Yeah, I'm Chris. I'm working with Dr. Elizabeth Havis in the geography department.
I'm Gus. I'm working with Rob Lamb under the Marchetti Library.
My name is Alyssa, and I work for Dr. Joel Ledley in the geology.
And I'm Sophia, and I work with Dr. Ladvika in the geography.
Okay. So, as you know, grad mentors, we are working our way toward creating a poster for the undergraduate research symposium. And we come at this at different levels. Some of us have never presented a research poster. Some of us have had a few attempts. So we found in the past that it's really useful to talk to people who, especially grad students who are a rank or two beyond undergraduate and can share some things that they've learned over the years about creating a poster. And we want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I don't know if you were all in here, what when Brian said, "Who has data?" and everyone went. So we're all in this together. So so this is part support group and part learning possibility. So I know some of you have big posters. Stephanie has
I can totally just go, it's in the hallway.
It's in the hallway.
Yeah.
Okay, and then at least one of you has it on a zip drive. So is anyone dying to go first? This is very informal.
Yeah, let's do it.
You want to go first?
I'm dying for it.
Okay, go. Someone might have to hold down the edges over there.
Yeah. So I'm Pierre again. So my English is not always perfect, but I'll try to make it as good as I can on this one. So I'm a postdoc, so I have a little more experience as just the grad students, I guess. So I've presented several posters, and this is a good example, and that's a bad example. And it's easy to see why. This is eye-catching, this is not eye-catching. First thing that when someone comes to see a poster, and that's a very good advice I got before living in the US, from friends in the US, is that you need something in the center that tells you what is the story. Because when you're in a hallway full of posters, like, you're not gonna stop in front of like graphs and stuff. Like, it's not what catches your attention. What will catch the attention first is the person who's interested is the title, but otherwise it's a picture. It's a picture, it can be a schematic, it can be whatever you want. It has to describe the environment, what you're gonna do, it has to tell the story basically. And so this is why this is cool, because first it's flashy, it's full of colors, and people will say, oh, I don't know what it talks about, but it looks artsy. And that's actually a cool factor. Like, people are gonna stop and they're gonna be like, okay, yeah, it looks colorful, I like it. I don't know why I like it, but I like it. And then you have to tell a story. And usually on the side of the poster, if you can add a bunch, what describes the story. If you do something that evolves in time, it's always good to have a bunch of pictures, that describe the story. And then, okay, there is a bad thing about this poster, and I'm sure you can tell me what is bad about it compared to this one. There's no graph, there's no quantitative data. You can't see what's going on. And actually the purpose of that poster was not to actually pull absolute data in it, it was to actually show a new measurement technique that Nadia and I are going to work on probably this week or next. So the problem here is that you don't have any quantitative stuff. What you're going to do in the lab is that at the end of the day, you're going to need some data points that show a trend, that show a response to an excitation or a physical mechanism, and you want to make sure that your theory matches what you see in the data or what you measured in the lab. So this is missing from here, but it's actually present there. So how to make a good poster is kind of a blend of the two that you see here. It would be to actually be able to tell a story, have an eye-catching story, not have too much text, because remember that usually when you're in a poster session in, let's say, a meeting of biology or physics or whatever, you'll be next to your poster, so you can talk about it. So you need something that supports your talk. So remember that you need eye-catching story results, but not too much text. The essential in text. That's what I would say. And a couple references, always nice to say who's done the work before you. And that's the end of the story.
What's your favorite software that you use to create your poster?
I used no, not even. I used LibreOffice. So you don't need any fancy tool to do whatever. You can download anything that's available. Just think about working your colors. Those colors is what's going to make the difference from you when people are 30 feet away. Is going to see colors. Oh, the usual thing.
I just wanted to interject that one thing about the dark home, the big pictures, is that was kind of designed for entering into the gallery of fluid motions.
Yeah, there was an artsy side to it. Obviously, it's encouraged in the type of poster, which is a photo contest, basically to display something that is striking and also that supports interesting physics. So what Matthew is mentioning is that the purpose of this poster was not to actually demonstrate the story plus the results. It's only to give an impact on something new that has to be understood, and that's actually a new contribution through pictures.
So wanted to have like really cool pictures on it. But also that's probably like less text than if you were to do like a poster that's like presenting like your research project.
Yeah, but even though, remember that the more text, the less people want to read. Like, we scroll on our phone all day, like we read every day. When you go to a poster session, you want someone that is entertaining next to the poster. You want someone that talks, that knows what he's doing, and that can communicate to the first random person in the street to the best person in the field. Any questions?
Questions or comments?
Yeah. Okay.
Kaylin, you want to talk about yours?
I can try and stand on So this poster is a poster work I did a few years ago. Went to a really, really big meeting. So I would say there are maybe some good features, but I guess this is mostly maybe in my mind looking at it, years later, maybe what not to do. So for me, it's really hard to see. You have to read this poster. You've got to be right up front. You've got to be right in front of it. The eye-catching factor, so. So for me, I would say if I were looking at my poster or talking to my former self when I made this poster, less is more. Just because you have all of these things to say, you have all of these results, doesn't mean you need to show them all at once. If I maybe had selected a couple of the pertinent results and explained them, that would have been more productive. I got actually feedback on this poster at this meeting. Sometimes at scientific meetings, you can sign up and actually have your poster or your talk judged. So it was really great to get some anonymous feedback. I guess maybe I'm being a little more harsh on myself than my judges were, but yeah, so too much text. It's really hard to see the numbers on these charts. And like Pierre is saying, who wants to read numbers? We read all day. So some way, can anyone think of a way to visualize numbers that I maybe could have used instead of listing from 5 different places values? Any thoughts on some way to visualize that? Yeah.
Graphs of some sort.
Yes, graphs. Heat maps, graphs, those would have been a much better solution than, even if it was just a simple bar graph to show a comparison. The value doesn't matter, it's the difference between the places that matters. And nobody's going to walk away thinking, oh, this was 37.589 plus or minus 2.4. That doesn't matter. It's, not leaving the right kind of message. Yeah, text is too small, too much text, figures are too small. We've got some attempt at color, but it's just washed out in the volume of text. One thing I do really like about this poster, I've got this conceptual model here. So this actually would have been maybe better to do in the center, somehow up big, up front, and then relate all of my results to this concept model. Just a cartoon of showing what's happening with these processes that we were interested in studying. So maybe that being the central focus as opposed to this kind of shotgun blast of here's everything I have. Just because you have a ton of stuff doesn't mean it is necessary for your story. And one thing I like to always, now that I've been through maybe not so good posters, thinking about is you want somebody walking by your poster to be able to get that main message or that so what point, even if you're not there to explain it. Would be my big advice. And then when you are there to explain it, this is something I observed at the American Geophysical Union meeting, or AGU, which is one of the world's largest geoscientist meetings. I was walking through one of the huge poster halls and talking to people about their research and wanting to learn. And one thing that kept happening over and over again, which I wasn't too happy to hear, I would ask someone about their research, and they would start by asking me a question. So let's say the research was on, stream hydrology. And they would ask a question, and someone would say, well, what do you know about stream hydrology? So starting off, that was a little off-putting for me because I'm expecting to get your story from you, not to have you quiz me on my scientific background or knowledge. So thinking about not only what the poster looks like, but how you're going to interact with it and your audience when you're there and when you're not there, I think are pretty important. So yeah, feel free to look at this after we're done, and you can see what I mean about it being too small if you can't see it anyway. But questions or comments? Alan?
One thing that I've always liked about your posters is that you always are, so if you guys see under the motivation and research questions in the upper left-hand side, Kaylin has her research questions very clearly put. And so there's no guessing, like, oh, what is she trying to do here? We know exactly what she's testing. And that's a really valuable.
And if the font was bigger, Megan could have read it without having to get super close and seen those questions.
What graphics program did you use for the poster and for your cartoon image?
Yeah, I used PowerPoint. I think you can change on Microsoft PowerPoint, you can change the dimensions of your slide. You're not limited to just what you normally would throw up on a projector. So I think what I did was I downloaded this template. Yeah, it's from phdposters.com. It was just a free template.
And then I think when you're working on it, you've got to be paying attention to, is it like half size and what kind of instructions you need to send it to the printer. I had one poster once and they misread the instructions. So instead of one large poster, I got 4 small posters on this size sheet. So that wasn't going to work. So now I have miniatures, but yeah, those are things to pay attention to. So I downloaded a template from phdposters.com and went from there. So I always try to integrate Carolina Blue, but don't feel like you have to do that.
And the cartoon?
The cartoon, I think I found that image and then I edited it in PowerPoint. Yeah, and also another tip, a lot of my figures I made using a statistical software program called R, which is great, but the image quality is not so great. So let's say you run your stats in Excel or another program and you have this nice figure and it shows your trend, but it's not showing up when you make it really big. There's no reason that you're stuck using that software program to show your trend. I have a friend who's got her PhD, she's a postdoc in Kansas now, biogeochemistry. And she does, for all of her talks and posters, she has her figures that she would use in her published papers, but for her talks, she remakes them. She remakes them so you can see the general trend or change, but it's like nice colors and things that are eye-catching and large enough to see at a distance. So don't feel like just because you have a figure from one program that you're stuck. Like I could have easily remade some of those so it would be easier to see. Okay, that's kind of a lot of talking.
Oh, that's great.
Any comments or questions from you guys? Yeah.
I think that's something we didn't say is that it's cool to have like reprints letter size at the bottom so that people can live with it. Because when they like your stuff, sometimes they're too shy here. It happens a lot, even people that are super well known. So it's easier that you can live and people can print like letter reprints of it so that they can keep the references and can write on it and also have your email on it.
Yeah. And I've seen some people do QR codes.
Yeah,
like
that's fancy.
That's fancy. I'm not. That's beyond my skill set. But yeah, no, the printed out paper is great because then even if you're not there.
And that is not a requirement for the undergraduate research symposium, but it's really good advice for future poster presentations.
It's also something that is missing between yours and mine is that when you do a graph and when you suggest data points, it's cool in a publication, it gets terribly boring.
Yeah.
You need, like, for instance, there's a cool way is you think of a graph, and let's say that I want to look into like the size of a storm on a planet. You know, you have a big, Jupiter. Jupiter has a big red spot, that is a big storm that keeps on rotating. It's been there for 300 years. People have been like messing up with like those kind of size of the storms. So what you can say is that I'm having the size here of the storm, say that it's like a tornado, and this is going to go on a plot here, and this is, let's say, the size of the planet. So it's nice if you have the Earth here, and then you can put Jupiter and Saturn and whatever. So you can, use pictures on top of the data points, because maybe you'll have data points, maybe there will be error bars, but it's nice to have like Earth here, and then I don't know, maybe the moon here, and then a big, Venus, which is a big planet, to show who is what. If you can do that, add a little like pictures, make your graph big. And again, it's all about the differences. Right? People don't care about the numbers. They want to see the split, the difference between the numbers. So if you can illustrate that, for instance, what Keelan does is that she has beds and she has ripples. If you see that for different regimes, you have no ripples, then, put flat. If you have ripples, put them there. Just explain what's going on.
Yeah, so just don't feel like you're trapped with your graph or your plot.
Publication slide thing.
Questions and comments for Kaylin? We'll get to the point where I'll get you an NSF logo and an Institute for the Environment logo and What else do I usually send you? Oh, and what Caitlin said about sizing your poster properly. So I think I would say yours is the most traditional size. I can't remember what those dimensions are exactly. 3 by 4? Okay. And I think that is the size that you need for the symposium, but these other posters are fine. It's just this is the more traditional standard size. But when you go to print it out, we can reimburse you for the poster printing costs. So,
Do you have a recommendation on where they should print?
yeah, good question. So, I mean, lots of students use the student stores printer or Keiko's. And some labs have plotters that you could use to print a poster. Any other advice?
Yeah, if you have space, use all the space. If you have like things that shrinks in the middle of a big plot and is gray, like,
Also, saving money, like if the entire poster is a dark color, that's a lot more.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah. Where do you print your posters?
We have a plotter.
You have a plotter. Okay.
We use page shape posters.
Okay.
It's out of the legal science library,
Okay.
but you pick it up on campus.
With the health sciences library, you can, what was the name again?
I think it's page shape.
Yeah, you upload it online. Usually as a PDF.
Yeah, you just email it to them, and then you just pick it up.
Pick it up the next day. You
Is
have to
it
pay for it.
like a day turnaround?
People have a lot of success.
I've been really, that's where I run.
Because like is there still a FedEx? I think it was on Campus Street where
Yeah.
Caribou used to be there.
Yeah.
That's where I had a problem where they gave me 4 managers.
I was gonna say, they're pretty spotty.
Yeah.
I've known a lot of people who have problems.
So anyway, there's no one right way to do it. Ask your people, ask your mentors, and you'll figure it out. Okay, Stephanie, do you want to talk about your poster?
I don't know how many of you can see mine over here.
And please feel free to get up, guys, if you want to stand closer. And in honor of the 4th of July, there are bomb pops, so please help yourself to your bomb pop.
Should I move?
It's the only patriotic message I could handle.
Yeah, I never left
Okay.
Doesn't move that way. So this one's not the first poster I did, but it's a poster that I did as an undergrad. And so there are definitely some things that I would change about it, but I was like fairly happy with how it turned out. One of the things that I would say is like my abstract and my background take up a ton of this poster. And I think it's important to have like enough background that people can tell what you're talking about, but I probably would have made that smaller somehow. Like I probably didn't need a picture of a squid on my poster, since that's like we work in a bacterial lab, and the first thing people always say when they see a poster that someone in our lab has done with a squid, it's like, oh, tell us about the squid. Like they don't even care about the bacteria, and so I think that's important to like direct your background and direct like the focus of your poster on what you're actually doing, because that's something that it didn't really need. It wasn't pertinent to my research that I was doing. But one thing that I do like about this one is I have a specific place where I put like my project goals and lay that out. And I also add a lot of pictures. I know this is something that we talked to Christina about, but like taking pictures of yourself while you're doing your research. Or like in our lab, we have a lot of plates with bacteria. And so for like one of these experiments, I did a transposon screen where I screened 20,000 colonies and almost all of them were blue. I was looking for 33 white colonies that I got. And that's really hard to explain to people in a way that they can visualize it. And so I feel like having a picture of one of those plates with like blue colonies, one white one, it just makes it easier to like have people visualize what you did. And so I know some people don't like the look of having like pictures of things in the lab going on posters, but I think that it's an easy way to visualize how experiments are set up if that's something that's good for your project. And then another thing that I do is for a lot of my methods, instead of just listing like this is what we did and writing it in text, I think it's really helpful to have pictures. So like this is an assay that we do with competitions. And so I just have the pictures of plates and I say, you know, we mix them together and this is a picture of what it looks like if you get this result. This is what a picture of it looks like with that result. And I think that it makes it easier for you to explain it to people because you have something to point at and say like, okay, look, this is what it should have looked like. And then you can point at your results and say, look, it matches. This was my result. And it keeps you more focused as you are presenting to people so that you're not tripping up and trying like, how did we set that up? What did I do again? So I think that having like very detailed like images of your methods and like directly how they relate to your conclusions would be really helpful.
So selecting visuals carefully so that they tell your story.
Yeah, I think it's have lots of pictures and like however that best fits your project to incorporate as many big pictures and graphs and things that are colorful for people to look at instead of text. And I think that that's just as important for you as a presenter as it is for people, because you want people to be interested and come see your poster, but you don't want to have to read through your poster trying to remember what you were going to tell people either. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. So I noticed that in a couple of the other posters as well that you have both bullet points and text in paragraph form. Is there a preference for one or the other, or is it?
I think it just depends on what you're trying to say. So I think that when you can stick with bullet points, it can be really beneficial. Like, I think the only not bulleted thing that I have other than my abstract is like in the methods where I'm just talking about like a specific way that something was set up. But when I'm looking at like conclusions and data points, I think it's really helpful to have bullets because you can look and say like, oh, I did this and then I did this and like these are the 3 results we got or whatever it is. And I think it just makes it more clear than trying to read through a paragraph.
Yeah, yours is the only poster where each section is blocked off. Like the other ones, they're all like kind of mushed together so you can't see segmented parts. Is there like a benefit to doing one or the other?
I mean, I think it's kind of personal preference. I like this. This was a template that Alicia gave me when I first started making posters, and it helped me when I was making them. If I had like a space for each thing, and it was like, okay, fill this space with whatever you did, and that's flexible. Like obviously, if you have more results, then you need more space for it, then change it. But it kind of like forced me to either like find something to fill the space with, or to like cut myself off at a certain point. And like when I first started making posters, that was really helpful to me. But I think it's just personal preference.
I think you raised a good point as well, because there's supposed to be boxes on this one, but the line was so thin that you didn't see it. So that's a good point. So make your boxes visible.
I mean, I think it's nice to have like some sort of headings over each thing, even if they're not actually boxed around it. I think it's important to have like results so people know where to look for your results.
Yeah, maybe if I had boxes on my sections, I would have seen before getting too far in, like, hey, this is too much. This space is crowded. Take things out. So it can be a helpful tool, and if you put them in, and then you want to decide, oh, I don't need that. My space fits evenly. You can still leave them. So yeah, other tools, like if you have something that's like a temporary placeholder or something, that's totally fine. It's not like it's set that way forever.
And one thing I would recommend with images is like I do mine in PowerPoint, and any images that I use, I keep them in like a separate PowerPoint file, because whatever you make in here, like this figure down here, took me about 50 tries and it still doesn't look great. But I basically have like a version of this saved in a different PowerPoint file so that anytime I make images with that in the future, I go back to it and I can edit it a little bit here and a little bit there. And then I can just save it as a picture and copy it into my poster file. And then you can change the size once you've got, like when I made this, I mean, I made it as like a giant blown up PowerPoint slide on my screen. And then I can just save the entire thing as a picture and then shrink it down to fit my poster and it stays proportionate.
Really good idea. Yeah, I wish I had done a better job of documenting how I made my figures and had the original files and not just a PDF. It's hard to edit a PDF. Yeah, for sure.
So how long should it take to explain your poster, or like how long does your pitch take? And also, is it better to kind of have like something memorized so that you're speaking directly to your audience, or should you be pointing stuff on your poster and saying like, this is what this is and this is this, or kind of like an issue?
I mean, I think a lot of it is personal preference. Kind of the way I do it is by the time you get to making a poster, like you know your research well enough, you should have like an elevator pitch kind of down. Because I mean, you don't want to bore somebody talking for like 20 minutes about your poster. But I would say maybe like 2 or 3 minutes to say like, this is what my lab does, like generally, specifically, this is my project, let me tell you about it. And I don't want to say you have to memorize it because you should be familiar enough with it that you can like hit the main points, like you've been working on it for a while. But I think it's important to be like, hey, look, I did this, and like, look, these are my results that I got, and like walk them through your poster very quickly, and then they will ask you questions about things that they were confused about or things that they were interested in.
Yeah, I would kind of say it's good to have like the short version and then like the medium version. Yeah, you could base that all from the long version, but you're probably never going to go into the long version. So shorter is better in this type of questions.
You kind of don't want to go into the long version because that means that somebody's really questioning and potentially. I've had this happen once before where somebody took about an hour and a half of the 2.5 hour long poster period, just and it was one of those things where at some point it's like, just go away. Like I will talk to you later. We'll grab a beer. I don't want to talk to you anymore because there are other people. So, I think Stephanie's right. You're gonna have like the whole spiel that you could say, but you're not actually. You'll have something very short and sweet.
You'll be prepared for like people will ask you questions if there's things that they're interested in or confused about, and then you're very prepared at that point to be able to answer. And if you don't know, you just say, we haven't done that research yet. I'll get back to you later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I asked my advisor if I could take one line down, and he said no. So.
Oh, paper one?
Yeah. So I have. Okay. So I brought 2, and I just want to point out to y'all from the get-go that both of them have just a metric shit ton of stuff on them, and that's just sort of my style, which is not good and it's not bad. It's just what it is. So this one, I'm going to start with this one. This is a little bit older, and this is a project now completed. So I was presenting this work when it was in its sort of preliminary stages. So a couple of things that I want to point out to y'all. First of all, if you are dealing, interestingly enough, there's been a lot of research that shows that amongst scientists, you have a higher proportion of people who are red-green colorblind than in other populations. So when you're making your posters, try and avoid using red and green together because people won't be able to see it. Now, in something like that, where you have like solid red or solid green, that's totally fine because people will still be able to, if you have red-green colorblindness, it's not, you can't see red and green, you just can't make out the difference between them. So you can still pick up gradients and that sort of thing. So it's okay to have red and green, but not together. Also, try to avoid fonts that have serifs. So if you can avoid using things like Times New Roman, it's easier for a lot of people to read, especially if you have a bunch of people that are not native Latin language or Latin alphabet readers. So if you have a lot of people coming from Russia or China or Japan, it's a lot easier for them to read things that don't have serifs. So just a couple of design things. So as you can see with mine, I forgot to brought up the boxes. I love having boxes all over my poster. I will put boxes where there don't need to be boxes. I like boxing things all the time. So in this poster, I have mine oriented horizontally. So the uppermost part, you have your summary and your methods. The bulk of the data is in this central portion. And then implications, results, acknowledgements, all that stuff is in the bottom. So you'll have noticed that other people like doing things in columns, other people like doing it in rows. As long as there's some sort of organization and as long as people can follow along. So in my case, I try and have Roman numerals to help guide people's reading of the poster. But as long as there's some way where people can follow, at least in the geosciences, it's generally okay to have sort of a different organization if you don't want to just do columns. So this is an older one. This is from this past April. So a couple of things that you'll see. First of all, I have these two plots up here that are really bad. And part of the reason I say that these are really bad is because this one is really, really small, and there's a lot of important data here, but it doesn't really come across. You have to read the paragraph here to understand why any of this is important. And then for the pH plot here, this is trying to show that with an increase in elevation, your pH declines. That's a really important point that I was trying to make, but I didn't do a necessarily good job using a box plot to show those data. So when you're thinking about how you want to present your data, really experiment. Try it with a line plot, and then try a box plot, and then see if it works better as a scattered plot. Feel free to experiment with that. Because I also, just like Kaylin, I use R as well. And the nice thing about R is that it's just a really easy command that will change what kind of plot you're looking at. And your mentor can help you with that. And so you can really start thinking about data visualization as you're moving along. Something else that I regret about this particular poster, so this one is oriented more like a lot of the others. So this is kind of the first column, and then this is just a big blob of data. But something I don't really like about this one is I have this little cartoon down here that looks like an afterthought. This was what I was testing. And so I should have made this a lot bigger because this was the hypothesis that I was trying to prove. And then also, when I made this plot, I didn't have any of these data yet. So, or excuse me, when I made the template for this. And so I just had a box, like a big blue colored box that I was like, oh, later I'll fill that in. And it turns out that this was by far the most interesting part of the story I was trying to tell. And it's in this upper corner where people's eyes are not necessarily going to travel immediately. So when you are thinking about designing your poster, I would really think about what is going to be the most interesting result that you're going to present, and try and make sure that that is in the absolute center of your poster, because that's where people's eyes are going to immediately go. And that's one of the things that you see on you know, especially on this the what did you call that, the photo poster?
Oh, it's called a gallery. It's a photo contest.
Okay, yeah. But like, you know, that big center image, right?
Eye catcher.
Yeah, eye catcher. Yeah. It's beautiful, and that's where all of our eyes immediately went, right? And you can't really control that. That's just human psychology. So try and put your most interesting stuff in the middle, and try and avoid having too much text like this directly in the middle. This is a bad example.
And you know, I don't know if you guys, anybody use when they write, like, do you ever have you create an outline ever for like a big term paper? Well, there's no reason you can't create just an outline, even if you just sketch it in a notebook or like on a whiteboard. Start to like sketch out how am I going to orient my columns or rows, or where am I going to put this, even if I don't know what it looks like. And then you can maybe start to visualize, here's where my story will fill in. And once you know where it goes, it's a lot easier to tell a story. So you don't feel like, oh, I've got to have it perfect the first time.
And I think you'll also probably note that all of us, you know, we presented these posters, right? We went out into the world and we said, this is what we do. So obviously at the time we were like, this is good enough. You're probably going to, at some point, look at some poster that you've made this summer or in the future, and you're going to go, oh no, oh, I can't believe I did that. But that's okay, because it's really easy to pick on yourself. And in reality, you're going to be presenting this stuff, and people are going to go, wow, that's so cool. And they don't care at all whether you're using, I don't know, whether you're using a sans serif font or something. They don't care. They just want to see what you do. So you hear all of us picking on ourselves. That's because it's really easy to do that. And we're all type A scientists, and that's just what we do. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Don't be worried. We're all like, oh, this is terrible. Any questions? Concerns?
So talk to us a little bit about how you deal with the jargon of your research when you are presenting.
That's a great point. So I think that the key is I always think about how I would present this to my mom, who's very, very, very smart, but not a geologist. And so if I can talk to her and explain to her what I've been doing for the last semester, and if she's like, oh, okay, I've got it. And you can do the same thing with a friend, or I don't know, with your parents or your siblings or something. But do find an audience that's not what you do, and try and explain it to them, because again, you can assume everybody's intelligent that's coming to look at it, but they're probably not going to be super adept at discussing, you know, oh, the differences between chlorites and vermiculites. It's okay. So that's how I deal with it. What about y'all?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like with ours, I know I don't want to say like dumb it down, like that makes it sound really bad, but it's like I study the types of secretion system, and nobody has any idea what that is because nobody else works on it. But I always just explain it in kind of a fun way. I'm like, oh, it's this really cool mechanism. It acts like a molecular syringe, and it lets different strains of bacteria stab each other and fight to the death, or whatever it is. Like, just find some like kind of fun way to explain, like, and be excited when you explain. Like, if you sound super bored when you're explaining what you're doing, everybody else is gonna be bored listening to it. And so you have to like figure out a way to, and like I still struggle with this sometimes, like not knowing all the right words all the time, like when I'm stressed about presenting something. And so I think it's important to like practice knowing like what words to say when, especially when you're talking about different techniques that you use, and just like finding a way to like confidently know that you're saying the right thing, but in a way that you're excited about.
Yeah, I think it's very important. The more theoretical is your field, the more you have to be using images of every day. So, especially when you're a mathematician, mathematicians do this thing. The theorems and the conjectures and everything that they derive, they give it like, you know, it's going to be the faulty thing, or it's going to be the easy one, or it's, you know, they give pictures to actually build a story. So when you talk to someone about like science, about soils, tell me about soils. No idea what's going on out there, like no idea. So it's very important to pick, you know, when I first started with Nadia, I was not going to tell her like, oh yeah, we're going to do internal waves and mesoscale is in the ocean. Like that doesn't mean anything. But you, with a drink, basically, with sugar and water and ice, you can basically recreate the ocean. So why don't you use the drink to explain what you do, rather than using big words that mean nothing to everyone but yourself? And this will help not only the person you talk to that is not from your field, but that's also going to help the other scientists that try to figure out a way to explain what they would do. So always remember to use, you know, the everyday things. It could be a shoe, it could be whatever fits your domain, and if it has to be explained, it has to be explained to anyone, absolutely anyone. And then you know that you've understood the subject.
Yeah, that's really good advice. That poster subject is stable isotopes, and then after, of course, I presented this, I heard a talk, and somebody gave a good analogy or metaphor for these things in like a cup of coffee and how much cream you add. which if you know about that, that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, using a real, just everyday simple example, as long as someone has seen a cup of coffee before and had the option of milk or cream, would be good. But yeah, I think, you know, and I guess for me, my field is, the name is a jargon-filled fun world. But it's a smaller subset of technology, and I guess it depends if I'm going to a meeting, thinking about your audience and when I'll use those words, but also if it's like a poster presentation that's a wider audience, definitely getting away from the jargon, getting to simple, like I think like you had said, Madeline, trying to explain it to your mom. I guess my group to explain to now tends to be middle schoolers. Like, okay, how would a middle schooler understand this? Tomorrow I'm going to give a talk to a senior group about, well, not really my research, but about groundwater. And I had to really think, okay, let me just go to the middle school level. I can visualize what middle schoolers might know and work with that. So we'll see how it works tomorrow. I think it should be fun.
So this piece is called science communication, and you'll find throughout your career that some scientists are better at that and some are really bad at it. So we're trying to give you the tools to be good scientists and science communicators.
There are actually people that make careers out of it. Like if you TED Talks are great. Your thesis in 180 seconds also is a good one. I don't know if you have that in the US, but
3 minutes. Yeah,
3 minutes, 180 seconds.
Yeah.
So your thesis in 3 minutes, you know, it's all right. But yeah, no, like, and also like you've got Nova, and I know that all these programs may sound boring, but they actually, like, if you take a step back, you know, once you've done your experience here, and you look into those, what these people do, it's actually, you're actually extremely good at communication. Even if you don't end up being in science, but you end up being marketing for whatever reason, this is an asset for your future career. If you know how to sell your thoughts, you know how to sell yourself, and you know how to sell a product. Remember that if you become researchers, you'll be entrepreneurs. You will have to sell your ideas and your product.
And also reach out to people who you know are good science communicators. You know, if you've had a professor who's really, really good at explaining your research, talk to them and say, hey, you know, I'm trying to sell this idea and I'm having trouble with this. How do I explain it? Because, you know, you have to learn that. It's a skill. It's not just something that some people are naturally blessed to be able to do. No, you learn how to communicate different. And so if somebody's really good at that, ask them to teach you.
I think you should also try to practice with your class if you have a chance, like sit down, because those are the people that know about what you're doing more than anybody else. And so they can like take a step back and they can maybe give you ideas for like how to explain it. They've explained it before.
And you guys are like you're really experienced viewers. I mean, how many lectures or talks have you sat through? And you can probably all think of a professor or a teacher that did or not so great job of presenting the material for class. So there's some examples of things to avoid, or people that gave something that was super memorable, like modeling the good behaviors, the good techniques, and knowing to avoid the ones that were less effective. So that's it.
So in a few weeks, some of the grad mentors will come back and we'll do a mock poster session. So whatever you have ready by then, I mean, it probably won't be printed. It'll probably be on a screen and might be partially done, but we want you to bring those in so that these guys can all kind of walk you through what you're presenting and make some suggestions, and you'll have a chance to ask more questions at that point. All right, well, so we're going to break because I know everyone needs to get back to their labs or work or whatever you're doing today. But please hang around and ask questions if you would like to.
Please take a bomb pot.
Please take another bomb pot. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to try to get I need to do this. We're gonna get that.
Hey guys, these plates can be recycled, so if you just want to like dust them off and add them to my pile over here, I'll recycle them. I don't think the bowls roll it because they're polluted.
A CV, updated CV, which we're working on next week. Updated CV. Oh, so there'll be what we call a final report, and it's more a self-evaluation of how this process was for you. Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, you can present, your work as part of the final report, but it's more of a reflection than like paper. Like science paper.
How long is it?
It varies. It can be 3 or 4 pages. Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, I have to read that. So, I mean, I like them short and sweet and thoughtful and. Yeah, and I'll send out reminders as we get close. I try to kind of pace it out so it doesn't all come at once.
I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah.
But I think we're almost there. I feel like we can try to see it.
Reset.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna get the clicker.
So, you actually will submit them directly to.
Are we doing internal
running this?
No, we have a big problem.
They literally put it in the
Yeah,
program,
no, that's fine.
but I also need a copy of it, and it can just be like a Word document with a paragraph and that's your abstract. But I just need it that way because of how I have to report and the stuff I have to actually share all the abstracts.
So as we play, we are we gonna get like a music case?
Yeah, I think there's like an online form that you fill out with your name, your researcher, your title.
I know for like some, there's a character and a wording, others just like.
Oh, for the abstract or for the whole poster?
Well, or, I mean, whatever they want, I guess, for the abstract and the poster. Is it for submitting them, like, what do they want, is the question.
So I don't remember ever seeing a word limit for the abstract. And the poster is between us. I mean, you never submit to them, to the symposium people, a poster. You just bring it with you.
Correct.
You eventually will submit to me a poster, because that goes in my files. So there's no word limit. Honestly, there's not even any design specification. You just have to kind of make decisions about how you want to present it.
Because I had a friend who did the undergrad research one.
Yeah.
She said she was struggling with her abstract. Because they gave her a word limit. I don't know, like, for the abstract was
Still going into that, Christina, but I'm gonna check now.
I mean, just like completely research. Formulate your abstract. and
Right.
have a word limit,
Right.
Or if you don't have a word limit,
Well, I'll tell you what,
I will check.
and let you know. Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
I was just
I just wanted to check if you got my email about missing next Wednesday.
Yes.
I don't know, I haven't checked my email, I've been out of town.
Okay.
this past weekend.
Yes.
So I just wanted to.
So what I generally say is everyone's allowed to miss a seminar. So it's fine. We'll be working on developing this CV, which I don't know where you are in your developing CV process, but there will be it'll be Brian again, so there'll be some kind of handout or something that will help you, and so you can work on it on your own.
Okay.
Bye, Gus.
Perfect.
Okay?
And I talked to Madeline and Dr. Manager also know, and so they said they would be willing to help me with that as well.
Okay, okay, good. Yeah, it's really fine, and I appreciate you letting me know so that I can just know who's not here and who is not supposed to not be here. You want to take the gluten-free one?
Sure.
I don't know what to do. I actually emailed you today to say, you're the only one who's going to eat gluten-free, so what do you want on it? Because I didn't want to get a gluten-free crust, and you're like, yeah, but I don't like that.
Oh, it's no problem. I'm